Hi, this is Janine, and I am here with your Diamond Mentor Moment. Thank you for joining me on this wonderful Wednesday. I am talking today about metaphorical thinking, metaphors, analogies, similes, all of this figurative language. Well, it is a fourth grade standard. That's when we first introduced it as far as the curriculum going, but now it's a standard for leadership. And we are going to talk about why metaphorical thinking is so important. I'm going to pull up a quote from Aristotle. Aristotle said, "The greatest thing by far is to be a master of metaphor. It is the one thing that cannot be really learned from others, and it is also a sign of genius, since a good metaphor implies an intuitive perception of the similarity in the dissimilar." Oh, I don't think I read that last part. Wow, let me say that again. A good metaphor implies an intuitive perception of the similarity in the dissimilar. And so, for those of you who have been following my work, I talk about intercultural creativity. And one of the cognitive methods of creative thinking is unusual associations, right? Seeing how things that are not normally connected and using your brain to connect them in new and unusual ways. People can do that if they practice, right? Some people it just comes naturally, but if you practice, it is a wonderful skill to have. And we talk about it creatively, and we also talk about it with intercultural connections. And so, why are metaphors important? I mention it in our book. We love this book. I Am Creative. This was our first inner child's book. We call them inner child's books because they look like children's books, but they're actually for adults as well. And there is a page where he's standing next to a tree, right? And he says that bark acts like a protector of every single tree. This poet way of thinking is called analogy, right? So when we use metaphors and analogy, we're looking at objects or at processes, and we're looking at different aspects of it, different elements of it, surface elements or functional elements. And where our brain is wanting to be a bridge and wanting to connect them. And so for the tree, when I do this with my son, we talk about the bark. Well, let's say, how is daddy like the bark of a tree? Well, what's the function of the bark of the tree? Right? It's meant as a covering, it's meant as a protective layer. So then we move that over. Okay, well, how is daddy a covering? How is daddy protective? The bark protects the tree, just like your father protects the family, things along those lines. So I do it for fun with myself and with my son. That rhymes. And I also do it just to exercise my mind, to kind of see, okay, these two things are not similar. What are some connections? How can I find the connection? Sometimes my husband says I go a little bit too overboard. Like, you're forcing that connection, but that's what we're supposed to do. That's what creative thinking is. When you think about the word idea, IDEA, it actually comes from the Greek, from the word idean, and it means to see. It means to see form and pattern. The word idea, right? All of you are looking to, or I'm assuming most of you are looking to have better ideas, right? An idea, you can have $1 million idea tomorrow. The word idea comes from the Greek, to see forms and patterns. And so that's a part what metaphorical thinking is, and using analogies. You're seeing form, you're seeing patterns, you're seeing connections. And as a teacher, as a parent, we actually use them all the time. The reason why I love talking about metaphors with intercultural creativity is because it's meant for creative thinking, but it's also meant for social connections. Those of you who have little ones, or you work around children, or you're an educator or a mentor or coach, great teachers know how to use metaphor because they are trying to connect with their target, the student or the child, and they have to understand what the child or student already knows, and then find that connection in what they're trying to explain. Leaders understand this. We do it a lot with kids, and leaders are looking to improve that skill in their leadership. If you are a speaker, some of the best speakers are utilizers of metaphor and analogy. There's something that goes on with the brain where we just attach to it. The brain needs to attach new information to old information, information it already knows. So metaphor and analogy are one of the best ways to do that. I wanted to share two videos because you know me, I always bring in the research, big on credibility. And the first one is by Dr. Michael Tout over at the University of Toronto. And he's talking about how, you know, instruments were really discovered long ago. They believe that this musical practice was done even before language was on the scene. And he talks about the importance of symbolism and abstract thought. And this is another reason why we are bringing arts into our trainings and making sure arts stay in school and in early education, because the arts are the vehicle for symbolism and abstract thought. But I want to bring him up so you can hear it from him and see what he says about that.
I like to propose that in the arts, the human brain learned for the first time abstract and symbolic thinking at the highest level of complexity, and that is a prerequisite for all these other developments. And so maybe this is why the arts came first. And if we pursue this a little further, yet the arts are laboratories of cognitive experimentation for the development of the modern human mind. And what happened phylogenetically over 100,000 years, we see in every child ontogenetically from age 1 to 6 before we get our hands on them and tell them to stop with that art business and send them to school. So maybe this is a little bit of a provocative statement, but it also, I think, has some important implications if we take that serious, that evidence for what is the role of music in the development of the human brain, in the sustention of the human brain, and in the continuous growth of the human brain in aging.
All right. So what he did is he talked about the importance of arts and how arts really helps develop the complex brain and helps us with symbolic and abstract thinking. And so once again, when we talk about metaphors and analogies and leaders who are able to use this in order to increase influence, that's what we need to do, increase influence, not dictatorship, but influence. What's one of the best ways to influence your team? And it's to get their brain, here's your brain, neural synchronized, right? And they talked a lot about neural synchrony in some of my past podcasts, and I talk about it in the book and the upcoming course. How do we synchronize brains, right? You storytell, you make that connection, metaphors, analogies. You help bridge what they know with what you want them to know, or what direction you want to lead them in. And so great teachers, great leaders, great speakers, and great influencers, not just online, but great influencers in the general sense, are great metaphorical thinkers and speakers. And just once again, to re-quote Aristotle, the greatest thing by far is to be master of metaphor. It's right. It's a good metaphor implies an intuitive perception of the similarity in the dissimilar. That is key. I wanted to share with you one of my new favorite neuroscientists, Dr. Raul Jandial, and him and Dr. David Eagleman. And maybe even a little bit Dr. Andrew Huberman. But I love a good academic, scientific person who can connect with the everyday person. I love it. And I myself sit in these lectures, you know, sometimes they're 8-hour lectures of speaker after speaker after speaker. And, you know, bless them. But as far as a person who is engaging and can connect with all types of odd audiences, I love that. And it's even fun when they're a neuroscientist, because sometimes I don't see that all the time. And so Dr. Jandial uses metaphor in order to explain the brain. Dr. Lisa Feldman Barrett does it as well in her book, 7.5 Brains. She talks about it like being an airport and a hub and just different routes flying all over the world. And you have your hubs of airport areas. But I wanted to share Dr. Jandial's example of his metaphor and see how how he uses it. And we get to learn a little bit about the brain. Here you go.
The conclusion is anything difficult where you have to think is good for your brain. If you ask Usain Bolt, how do I get stronger legs? Run. It's intuitive. But the flesh in our skulls, it's meant to think and feel. And that is the power of self-growth. And it's a thinking machine. It's a thinking flesh that you actually have to use or to protect itself, because it's an energy hog, right? It's 3 pounds, but uses 20%. If you're not using parts of it, it'll program itself to let those parts of the garden wither. So the diversity of thinking and the depth of thinking, just one level past what you're used to, is the way to keep the whole garden flourishing. And it is a garden in there. There's chemicals, there are things moving, there are different types of brain cells. It's not just neurons. So I always try to give that metaphor analogy, if you will, that it's a garden and you have to irrigate it and stimulate and tend to all the corners, particularly the ones you're starting to neglect. Maybe it's your left hand. Getting out of the box and engaging the recesses of your mind is the most important thing. And then you have the creative things happen. You don't just sit down and have them happen. You got to work and dream and go hard. And on top of that, something creative can happen.
All right, so that is Dr. Raul Jandial. He's a neurosurgeon and neuroscientist over at the City of Hope in southern Los Angeles, and using the metaphor of a garden to explain the brain. And a garden, has different just plants in it, different fruits, different vegetables. They are, connected in the root system, and there's just different things going on. And I loved how he uses metaphor. He also talks about the brain, the neurons at least, being like jellyfish and sending these electric like pulses to other tentacles. So he's really deep in metaphor because he understands that we may not understand how the brain works, but we've seen jellyfish, interact. We may not understand how the brain works, but a few of us have interacted with gardens. We've been around gardens, or we've seen them more than we've seen the actual underworkings of the human brain. And so metaphor is important. I was going to do a small activity, but I am going high in time. So we have, of course, if you're looking for more tips on intercultural creativity, we have our course coming out soon about the 7 gems of intercultural creativity. How is cultural competence and creative thinking intertwined? We have a My Brain, My Beautiful Brain, another inner child's book. It looks like a child's book, but it's actually meant for adults. And our last publication was The Power of I Am with the illustrator, Victoria Mapala. And this is the neuroscience of positive affirmations. What's going on in your brain when you're hearing positive words and encouraging words and all of that good stuff. So we hope you enjoyed this Diamond Mentor moment on metaphors. Try to practice it. How is the sun like you? How is that daffodil like a giraffe? What is this process? Going over here, check out the TED Talk, The Power of Analogy. He has some wonderful information about utilizing metaphors in your life and how they help your creative thinking. We'll see you next time for our Diamond Mentor moment, and have a metaphorical, wonderful night. Bye-bye.